Today we are going to be discussing 5 pre-flop hacks and 5 post-flop hacks to help you crush small stakes cash games. Now, these concepts also apply to tournaments, but we're going to be discussing specifically cash games today. I know a lot of you struggle with pre-flop and post-flop, so I want to make sure you're not making those sort of egregious blunders. If you're here in the chat, say hello. If you're watching later, click the like and subscribe button. Right now, cash games are booming, and many of my students are crushing 1-2 and 2-5 no limit hold'em, both live and online. So we're going to be going through these tips that you can implement right now to ensure that you are playing well and to take your game to the next level. Recognize that if you have both strong fundamentals and you focus on exploiting your opponents, you are going to thrive. Now, it is important to make sure that you actually have an edge against your opponents. If you're being loosey-goosey having a sandwich, or if the rake is gigantic or something like that, you may have a tough time winning. But if you have a big edge over your opponents and the rake is reasonable, you should be fine. First, let's go through the 5 pre-flop hacks. First time watching live, hello, hello. Number 1, stop limping. Period. So many players think that they should be open limping and trying to see the flop. Now, if 4 people limp and then you have a suited ace or a suited king or suited connector or a small pair, limping behind is probably fine. But if you are first in, you should be raising. Take a look at what you should be raising with to 3 big blinds from early position. Recognize, even small pairs are not particularly great. Suited connectors are not particularly great. Red is raised, blue is fold. From an early position, you just have to play cautiously. A lot of people may think, well, what if I limp and my opponents let me see the flop for cheap? Isn't that good? Yeah, but you're going to get raised sometimes. And when you get raised, all of your marginal stuff is quite bad because you're out of position. Also, imagine you do limp a lot of these medium hands, like some suited kings, some suited gappers, some suited connectors, and some okay offsuit stuff like ace-10, king-jack, and queen-jack. What does that do to your limping range? Well, it makes it bad, right? It's just not a good range. And if your opponents raise in position against that range, you're going to have a very difficult time defending. Pre-flop, it's already marginal, and then post-flop, you're usually going to make something like 1-pair marginal kicker. Sure, sometimes you're going to make a strong hand if you flop 3 of a kind or straight or something like that, but it just doesn't happen all that often. Do not limp and try to see a cheap flop when you are first in. From late position on the button, you'll also find a whole lot of players limping. That is not a good strategy. You may say, but don't I want to limp in with the 8-6 offsuit or the 8-4 suited to try to flop well? Not if there's a rake, that's for sure. And also, you do not really want to be letting the blinds see the flop for free. Recognize that whenever you raise, you just win the pot sometimes. And that's fine. You may say, but 1.5 big blinds is not all that much. Do I even care about winning that? And the answer is yes. Most hands would be thrilled to win 1.5 big blinds. It's actually a lot of profit for an individual hand. And denying the blinds their ability to see the flop is very, very valuable. Is it okay to call if other people limp in front of you? It depends, right? You also want to consider, what do my opponents do incorrectly? Imagine they limp with, well, a lot of medium strength stuff like we just discussed. You should be raising with basically all hands that do better than those hands because you are heavily favored due to being in position, right? Being in position with a better range than your opponents is quite powerful. I did say, though, with some of the implied odds hands, like maybe some suited aces, suited kings, suited connectors, pairs, it's probably okay to limp behind. That said, with the offsuit big card stuff like ace-9 offsuit, king-10 offsuit, queen-jack offsuit, stuff like that, you would much prefer to raise against your opponents and either get it heads up or steal the pot. Now, if you are going to raise over limpers, what a lot of people do wrong is they raise far too small. It will go limp, 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 and then someone will raise to 5 big blinds. We have to realize, in this spot, when you make it 5 big blinds, your opponents only have to put in 4, and if they all call, they're putting in 4 to try to win something like 20. Well, clearly, they should not be folding much of anything, because they're getting great odds, right? So you're going to want to raise to roughly the size of the pot, which is, in general, 3 times the last amount that was put in, plus any additional money in the pot. So let's say there are 4 limpers. 4 limpers, okay? The last person put in 1. 3 times 1 is 3, plus the other 3, that's 6, plus the small blind and big blind. That's 7.5. Now, if your opponents are putting in 7.5 big blinds, it starts to become kind of risky. What are you doing against people who limp call with pretty much any hand? Raise with a good, strong, reasonable range and crush them. You want them calling with junk. If your opponent's going to limp with the 8-4 suited or the Jack-4 offsuit or the 6-9 offsuit, you want to be raising them aggressively. As Box of Boxes says, well, then you're printing money, aren't you? Yes. A lot of people get afraid of their opponents limping with any 2 cards, thinking, oh, they might make 2 pair, and what do I do? We'll talk about that later in the post-flop section. But if you raise with hands that are better than your opponents, and you're just decently far ahead of them, you are going to extract a ton of value. GTO doesn't work for small stakes. That is totally incorrect. GTO works for any stakes. Obviously, though, you make more money by maximally exploiting your opponents. This is the absolute basic game theory optimal theory. If you know what your opponents do wrong, develop an optimal counter strategy. If you use a game theory optimal solver, you can go through, put in the strategy your opponent uses if they play poorly, and then you'll get a very different strategy, right? For example, say your opponents fold to continuation bets too often on the flop. You just know they do that. Well, what should you do? Don't play the game theory optimal theory, or strategy. Don't play the game theory optimal strategy because that presumes your opponents play well. If your opponent plays poorly, by folding too often, continuation bet the flop pretty much every time because they're going to fold too often. Common sense, right? You have to use a little bit of common sense to play poker, and while the game theory optimal strategy will take advantage of anything your opponent does that is also not the game theory optimal strategy, you'll make more money by maximally exploiting your opponents, which is exactly what I'm telling you to do right here. Number 2. Hello from Colombia. Hope you're having a great day. You should be 3-betting more often. A lot of players think that they should call raises unless they have a good hand, in which case, when they have a good hand, they think they should 3-bet. And while the best hands do raise over an initial raise, they do re-raise, aces, kings, queens, ace, king. Notice a lot of the other hands that are re-raising in red. We have some ace-x suited, some king-x suited, a few suited connectors, and some offsuit marginal hands like ace-queen, king-queen, ace-jack, king-jack, ace-10, and queen-jack. Now, I realize this may be uncomfortable for some of you, but when you are in position, you're going to want to be 3-betting with a polarized range. In this spot, we have a range put up here for the button against a cutoff raise. You don't get to be all loosey-goosey and splashy. You're not calling the cutoff raise with the 10-7 suited, 8-6 suited, 6-4 suited, queen-9 offsuit. No, those are simply not good enough. And if you do want to play them, it's probably ideal to put in a 3-bet with them. When you 3-bet with marginal hands, like, as we see here, king-7 suited, king-8 suited, queen-9 suited, 6-5 suited, your opponents, assuming they're halfway decent at poker, will fold out a lot of their offsuit high card hands, like queen-jack, king-10, etc., that are going to be in bad shape against your absolute best hands, aces, kings, queens, and ace-king. So, that is definitely something that you are going to want to do. What about limping at a splashy table in order to raise because 3 people to your left always raise as an exploit? So what you're saying is if you go limp, 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 you think the players to your left are going to raise very often over the limpers? I mean, it could be fine, but what are you going to do? Limp and then re-raise? That looks very, very strong, right? Then you have to ask if they didn't call your re-raise and figure that out, right? You have to ask, are your opponents going to call the limp and re-raise? Some people will, some people won't. How bad are your opponents? Why are we raising king-7 suited but not king-10 suited? Because when you raise, or when you re-raise king-10 suited, or king-7 suited, your opponents are going to fold out king-jack offsuit, king-10 offsuit, king-9 offsuit. If they have it, they're folding out better hands. This is referred to as a polarized range. Anytime you're in position, your 3-betting range very often needs to be polarized, meaning you have all of your best hands, and then a lot of hands that are barely good enough to call or not quite good enough to call. You don't want to re-raise with the medium strength stuff like ace-jack suited, king-10 suited, ace-10 suited, queen-10 suited, a lot of small and medium pairs, because when you re-raise those and you get 4-bet, well, now you took a hand that was pretty good and you have to fold it. If you 3-bet the king-7 suited and your opponent 4-bets, you don't care, you fold. right? Do we have any guidance on adjusting when the table open size is bigger? Yes, we're going to discuss that in just a second. If you 3-bet to 3 times the initial raise, that's 30% of your stack. Sounds like you're playing very, very short stacked. We have plenty of content on playing short stacked at PokerCoaching.com and on this YouTube channel. But if you are only playing 30 big blinds deep or 40 big blinds deep, whatever, depending on your opponent's raise size, you should probably just be going all in. If they make it 3 and you only have 30, going all in is very reasonable. Or you can make it like 7.5. If they make it 5 and you only have 30, well, you need to be going all in or folding a lot of the time. When you're out of position, you're going to find that your 3-betting range is often very linear, meaning you're 3-betting with just all of your good best hands and calling with the more marginal stuff. Why is that? That's because when you're out of position, you are far more likely to get called when you 3-bet. Also, when you 3-bet, you're going to want to 3-bet larger. Notice here, if someone raises to 3 big blinds, in position, we have us re-raising to 10. Out of position, though, we're re-raising to 12. And notice we're just re-raising all the best hands, right? And that's because your opponent in position is less incentivized to 4-bet because they're in position closing the action, and you're going to get called more, right? So you're not going to be forced to fold to a 4-bet nearly as often, which means you're going to realize your equity. Since discovering this channel, you're steamrolling. Glad to hear it. Number 3, stop defending the big blind to large raises. As someone in the chat just said, a lot of players in small stakes games raise huge. They'll raise to 3 big blinds, or 5 big blinds, or 10 big blinds pre-flop. If you're playing 1-3 no limit hold'em, some people just make it 30. That's their default. In some games, that's the default. Well, what does that do to the structure of the game? It essentially makes it to where the blinds don't matter. And if the blinds don't matter, you should be playing far tighter because essentially you can just sit around and wait for good hands. You should be folding a ton. So you want to make sure that when you are playing cash games, you are very sensitive to raise sizes. A 2.5 big blind range, or a raise size is very different than a 4 big blind raise size, and that's really, really different than a 10 big blind raise size. So you're going to want to make a point to adjust. Also, you're going to want to fold more often as your opponent's ranges are stronger. So if your opponent raises from early position, or if your opponent's just a really tight player in general, you're going to want to fold far more often than the game theory optimal strategy plays, which is already kind of tight from the big blind when there is a rake and there is no ante. Of course, if there is no rake and there's an ante in play or something like that, other reasons to get involved, you will play looser, right? Always consider what has changed and adjust accordingly. Let's take a look at the big blind strategy against a 3 big blind low jack raise. The low jack is the first act if there were 6 players at the table. This is against a 3 big blind raise, okay? Which may be far smaller than you're used to. Take a look at how tight you're supposed to play against a reasonable opponent. Case ace-10 offsuit, king-jack offsuit, queen-jack offsuit, all folding already. All this suited stuff is folding, right? Notice we're also 3-betting pretty linearly, just a lot of the best hands, and then hands with good playability, right? But not a whole lot of 3-betting because the low jack, under the gun 6-handed, should be quite tight to begin with. So because they should be quite tight to begin with, you also in turn have to be quite tight. This is very different than if you're playing in a tournament where there's an ante in play and no rake, then you're going to be defending far wider. At your local game, a 5 big blind raise is a minimum raise. I don't think it's officially a minimum raise. A minimum raise is 2. Unless you're playing some weird version of No Limit Texas Hold'em. It's not really No Limit, then it's 5 big blind raise minimum Hold'em. That said, let's consider how you would change your range if your opponent was raising bigger with the same reasonable opening range. What would you do? Well, all of these hands that are on the cusp of playability, which are low-suited aces, weak-suited kings, queen-9 suited, jack-9 suited, 10-8, 9-7, 8-6, 7-5 suited, all these hands would become folds. And recognize, a lot of players in your games are not going to make those folds. They're going to call with any jack-6 suited or 9-8 offsuit because they think, oh, big blind, I have some money in them, closing the action, let's see the flop, without realizing they're out of position and they're going to realize their equity very, very poorly. So, your opponents will be making blunders in this spot by calling all sorts of trash that you will not. Recognize that anything you do that is better than your opponents is going to result in you winning money in the long run. And if you make the same mistakes that they do, you're not going to win money in the long run. This is actually why a lot of small stakes players get stuck in the small stakes games indefinitely, because they copy the strategies of their small stakes opponents. And I want you to use a little bit of common sense here. Do you think most of your small stakes opponents are winning at poker? Take a second, think about it. In small stakes games, your 3-bets get called by a lot of players, so you're forced to tighten up. Nothing wrong with that. Play tight. If your opponents all were winning, they would have moved up to higher stakes games. Most of your small stakes opponents are losers. So, why would you copy what they're doing? If they raise to 5 big blinds, a pretty bad strategy, why would you do that? You say, but that's just what everybody at the table does. Who cares? You don't want to copy losing players. It's not a good strategy. If they defend the big blind with the Jack 5 suited to try to flop 2 pair, it's a bad strategy. Why would you copy that? Recognize your opponents are playing poorly. You win them by using a better strategy than them, not by copying the same bad strategy that they are using. Do all pocket pairs call a 3-bet? Depends on the size. If your opponent re-raises to a normal size, usually yes. By the way, if you do find that you get called the vast majority of the time where you 3-bet, say they make it 3 and you make it 10 and you see that they just call every time, well, you want to take away some of the bluffs. For example, in this scenario, if your opponents will call your 3-bet too wide, you're going to want to 3-bet more with hands like jacks, 10s, 9s, 8s, ace, queen, ace, jack, and less with the polarized range, right? Always consider what your opponents do incorrectly. Next, you want to make a point to stop stacking off with pocket jacks and ace, king pre-flop. A lot of you in the comment section, and a lot of players in general, complain about losing with the pocket jiggities and the big slick. But recognize, when these players lose with these hands, quite often, it is not because they ran bad or got cooler, it's because they were playing it for too much money before the flop. The deeper you are, and when you're in position, you should be more inclined to just call and see the flop. You're going to find that in general, if you put in 200 big blinds with pocket jacks, or quite often even ace king, you're not going to be in good shape. Pocket jacks and ace king are great if some money goes in the pot, but not so great when a ton of money goes into the pot. Let's take a look. Here we have the low jack strategy when you raise versus a 12 big blind 3-bet. Okay? That would be with this range, right? The low jack raises to 3. The big blind is 3-betting aces, kings, queens, ace, king, and not a whole lot else. And you're going to find that in general, a lot of your opponents are not going to be 3-betting the low ace-x suited or the 6-5 suited or the 10-9 suited or king-10 suited or queen-jack suited. They're going to have aces, kings, queens, jacks, and ace-king. Maybe ace-queen. What does stacking off mean? That means putting your entire stack in before the flop. Stop getting your entire stack in before the flop with hands like jacks and ace-king automatically for a lot of chips. Let's take a look here. In this scenario, when you raise the low jack, the big blind 3-bets, and you're in position, closing the action, here's what you should do. You should 4-bet with only aces, some kings, some ace-king offsuit, and then a few bluffs, all with suited aces or suited kings. That's it. Seems tight, huh? A lot of people make the mistake of 4-betting, though, with pocket queens, pocket jacks, all the ace-kings every single time. But you have to realize, though, if your opponent's 3-betting range should be tight, and again, if anything, your opponents will be even tighter than GTO. This is a spot where you simply do not 4-bet much at all. Why does GTO want to call / go all in so much pre-flop? It doesn't want to go all in. It wants to go all in basically never. 0.19% of the time. Ignore that. That's essentially something you do not need to worry about. Instead, just put those in your re-raising range. Why does it want to call so often? Because you're in position closing the action, getting pot odds. When you are in position closing the action, getting pot odds, you must defend quite wide. Now, I would venture to say that a lot of people defend far looser than this. They defend every ace, queen, king, queen, ace, jack offsuit. But these are not good hands against this 3-betting range. Okay? Instead, you're going to want to call with a lot of the suited ace type stuff, the suited Broadway hands, suited connectors, and the pairs. I would call the pairs every time. That's reasonable. I would call the majority of suited connectors. King jack, queen jack suit is probably fine. The low suited connectors are great. Don't go around folding those because then you're usually very, very live. You see people call with ace 4 suited, king jack suited, and ace queen offsuit every single time. Yeah, that's a mistake. Now, you want to consider always what your opponent's doing correctly. Imagine your opponents will 3-bet pre-flop, but then only put in money post-flop when they really, really love their hand. Let's say when they make top pair or better. Well, in that scenario, you might drastically over-realize your equity because you can call the 3-bet, call the flop, and then win every pot on the turn where your opponent doesn't have anything. If that's the case, then feel free to get out of line and exploit them. The problem, though, is a lot of people think their opponents are far worse than they actually are. Recognize that just because some of your opponents may seem to be a little bit weak and tight and passive, that does not mean they necessarily all are, okay? Let's see. Are people looser in small stakes games than the low jack? Well, here is roughly the low jack strategy, maybe slightly looser. You'll be a little bit looser than this in the low jack. Notice, are most people looser than this? Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. A lot of people will take every king 10 offsuit and queen 10 offsuit and 9-7 suited and raise them. If your opponents make mistakes, exploit them, which is actually tip number 5. It's as if you could see the PowerPoint. Can you all see ahead somehow? Exploit loose, splashy players. These loose, splashy players who play too many hands, often too passively, they're just sticking around trying to make something, are going to be the players you absolutely crush. And I fully recognize, fully recognize, a lot of your opponents in small stakes games are too loose and passive. This is why they are losing poker players. The two main exploits against these players is to isolate their limps, usually with large pot size raises. If they're limping all sorts of trash, like we discussed earlier, raise them and either force them to fold or call from out of position with some trash. You want your opponents playing out of position with trash. And next, you're going to want to isolate their raises by 3-betting them with a wide linear range, especially when you are in position. So going back to this chart, which is what you see on the button against a cutoff raise, you don't necessarily want to 3-bet this polarized range. Just because a strategy is the GTO strategy does not mean it is the ideal strategy if you know what your opponents will do incorrectly, right? If you know your opponents are going to call your 3-bet with all sorts of marginal junk, well, 3-bet with the hands that crush that marginal junk, right? I mean, you may want to 3-bet something like ace-10 suited and better, queen-jack suited and better, ace-10 offsuit and better, pocket eights and better, something like that. If your opponents will call with all sorts of trash, you don't really want to have a king-7 suited or a 6-5 suited, right? You'd much prefer to have pocket eights or ace-10 suited, a hand that's just absolutely demolishing them. Also, by getting it heads up, you're going to be able to realize your equity far better compared to when it is multi-way, where you kind of have to make the best hand a lot of the time. Because when someone sees the flop 7 ways, for example, or when you see the flop 7 ways, someone's going to make something. And if it's not you, it's probably someone else. By doing these two things, this is going to put you in profitable situations over and over and over and over again. What if someone only raises with the absolute best hand? How much more do we fold with good hands? Well, imagine they're only raising jacks and better and ace-king, maybe because they limp everything else, or they are so tight and they don't even play those. Recognize you can be loose, but only raise with the best hands, right? If your opponent's only raising aces, kings, queens, jacks, and ace-king, you can call with all the pairs and a lot of the suited connectors and a lot of the suited aces because you know that if you do make a premium hand, you're highly likely to get paid off. But the offsuit stuff goes way down in value. Like ace-queen offsuit is terrible. Ace-jack offsuit, king-queen offsuit is terrible. So you want to be playing implied odds hands, assuming your opponents do not raise huge. Now, a lot of these tight players will raise to 10 big blinds pre-flop, and then you can't really call with anything. And that's fine. Recognize that they are sitting there blinding out. That's good for you. Let's see. Do we discuss this on PokerCoaching.com? Of course we do. We have the Advanced Cash Game course and the Advanced Tournament course on PokerCoaching.com that discusses all sorts of exploits using GTO solvers, but adjusted for the common things your opponents will do incorrectly. Now let's go through some post-flop hacks. Number 1 is to play marginal made hands passively. You have to stop worrying about your opponents getting lucky against you. And when you have a medium strength hand, you usually don't want to put a whole lot of money in the pot. It's the exact opposite of what a lot of people do. They think pocket aces is great if they see the flop 6 ways and it comes 9-8-6. Hate to break it to you, pocket aces is okay if maybe one bet goes in on 9-8-6, but beyond that, it's probably not against multiple players. When you flop middle pair or an under pair or a good ace high against only one player, you're usually going to want to focus on keeping the pot small by checking it back, especially if the board's generally just not good for you, right? Like say you raise from middle position and the big blind calls and it comes 9-8-6, the big blind's going to have a lot of connected stuff that connects well on that board, whereas you have a lot of unpaired high cards. So you just have to do a lot of checking. It's okay. You probably should not be continuation betting 100% of the time against most players in most spots. And that's especially true in live poker, where your opponents will often play very straightforwardly on the turn. So your medium strength hands, like middle pair, often just wants to check it back. Check, check, flop, go to the turn. A lot of people think, oh, middle pair is probably good. I need to bet and get a lot of money in and force them to fold. You have to realize if you're forcing your opponent to fold, they probably only had 6 outs or less to begin with on the flop, right? And also, if you bet huge, yeah, you're going to win a lot of small pots, but when you do get action, you're usually not in great shape. Middle pair is really good if a little bit of money goes in the pot, or a medium amount of money goes in the pot, but not if the pot gets huge, because as you bet more and more, your opponents will start folding out their garbage. And you may say, oh, my opponents are calling stations. They call with anything. Maybe they do, maybe they don't, but if the flop comes ace, jack, 7, and your opponent has 8-4 or 4-3 on ace, jack, 7, and you bet, they're probably going to fold. And if they don't, then, well, your life's going to be really easy because you're going to be rich. You'll have money problems then instead of poker problems. When you bet the flop and your opponent calls, on the turn, you're going to find that top pair weak kicker is usually a marginal hand. It's a hand that can put in usually one more bet, either on the turn or on the river. And against a lot of players, it's usually ideal to let it go check-check on the turn unless you think they're going to call the turn far too wide. Now again, if your opponent is going to call too often, if you think your opponent does not like to fold, you can certainly get away with value betting, especially if they're not going to raise you all that often. But against most reasonable opponents who are trying to win, medium strength hands typically want to play somewhat passively. They're good if a little bit or a medium amount of money goes in the pot. They're not good if a lot of money goes in the pot. Next, you want to focus on your pot odds on the river. Pot odds exist, and too many players do not adjust nearly often enough when they're facing small bets or giant bets. Here's some common river pot odds. If your opponent bets half pot on the river, you need to win 25% of the time or more to justify calling. How do we get that number? Well, your opponent's betting 0.5, and you divide that amount, 0.5, by the total amount of money that will be in the pot after you call. Okay, so how much will that be? There'll be one pot size bet plus their half plus your half. All of that goes into the pot. So 0.5 divided by 2 is 25%. You can do all this math for all these, and you'll see it's all the same formula. The bet you're facing divided by the total pot after you call. So when your opponent bets half pot on the river, you really don't need to win all that often. Only 25% of the time. You can lose 74% of the time calling this river half pot bet and still make money. A A lot of people hate that idea. They have a hard time wrapping their brain around that idea because they think, oh man, I'm losing 74% of the time. That's not good. But you make money by calling there. If your opponent pot sits on the river, you only need to be good 33% of the time. If your opponent's betting gigantic, now we use some rough math here. If they bet gigantic, you only need to be good about half the time. So recognize that in these situations, as your opponents bet smaller and smaller, you have to call far more often. Now you may say, well, my opponent bets small, they're trying to sucker me in. They're trying to get value from me. Maybe they are. If your opponents are that bad, to where they always bet small with their good hands, and perhaps they always bet big with their bluffs, well, then call them every time they're bluffing, or raise them every time you're bluffing if you can't beat the bluffs. You can rewatch this. Everything on YouTube is rewatchable. I believe this will go in a live tab if you look at my profile. That's where typically live streams go. We also have some streams of me playing poker against all of you. We'll be doing that again on March 30th. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Next, we just discussed how you want to be careful with your marginal made hands, but exploitatively, betting thin for value can be a very strong play if your opponents have a few glaring weaknesses in their game. If your opponents are calling stations and they just cannot fold any sort of pair, and on top of that, they will not bluff the river often enough, this allows you to go for thin value. One major benefit of checking behind on the turn with top pair no kicker is that your opponent on the river is going to feel somewhat inclined to bluff. If they won't bluff though, as a lot of small stakes players don't, they're just chickens. If your opponents are not going to bluff often enough, there's no point in checking behind top pair because you're not going to be inducing those bluffs. Also, if you're not going to get check raise bluffed on the turn often enough, that allows you to bet your middle or top pair marginal kicker or middle pair and get value, right? Without the fear of getting check raised off your hand. And if you do bet top pair no kicker on the turn and get raised against a tight, straightforward player, you just fold because you're in terrible shape. All right. Let's take a look at a hand. King 10 suited. Are we in our window? We raise it up from the cutoff to $9. A 1-3 no limit hold'em. Already people are saying, oh man, you should make it 20. No, you should make it roughly 9. You want to use small bets before the flop because it allows you to play a wider range profitably. And also, it allows you to take advantage of your post-flop skills. Consider what happened if you just went all in pre-flop. You're going to win the pot almost every time, right? But is that a good result? The answer is no, because you don't get to take advantage of your post-flop skills. Now, you may think that you're really, really bad at post-flop poker, and maybe you are, but you're not going to get any better by avoiding it. A Band-Aid is not the solution to the problem. You instead need to study poker. Fortunately for you, we have peakgto.com with an excellent trainer, so you can get in there and train and learn how to play very well. And at pokercoaching.com, we have all sorts of courses, including the Cash Game Masterclass, to help you learn to play well. We raise it up, big blind calls. Flop comes. King 3-2. They check. We should definitely bet this flop. We go small in this situation. $7. You may say, why so small? They're going to call every time. Well, that's certainly good with our hand, right? You really want your opponent in with the Jack 10 of diamonds when you have the King 10 of spades on King 3-2. You may say, but aren't we missing value? From what? A king, maybe. A 3 or a 2, maybe. A good draw, maybe. But first things first, we're not like crushing good draws. Yeah, we maybe miss a little bit of value from a 3 or a 2, but recognize we're crushing those at the moment, right? And by betting small, we're going to get called by a lot of other weaker stuff. So a lot of players against a small bet will call with 9-8 of clubs for backdoor flush draw, and that's it. And obviously, you want 9-8 of clubs in the pot, even though it will outdraw you some tiny portion of the time. So we go small. Calls. Turns a queen. They check. Now, this is a spot where checking it back could actually be reasonable. You may say, what? Recognize, though, that if you bet this turn and get called or raised, it is miserably bad for you, especially if you think your opponent will maybe not bluff so often, and if you think they'll start folding out a 3 or 2 if you bet again on the turn. You'd much rather them stay in the pot so they can either bluff the river or pay you off on the river. However, if your opponent will not bluff the river often enough, and if your opponent will not bluff the turn often enough, and your opponent will call a turn bet with any pair or draw, well, then you should definitely continue betting, right? Exploitatively, betting again on the turn is very, very good. You may want to bet the turn if you had a queen. Like, say you did bet the flop with queen 9 of diamonds and you spike a queen on the turn. This could be a fine spot to keep betting the turn, even though in Game Theory Optimal world, you would never bet that hand on the turn. We bet again. Opponent calls. There's another queen. They check. What should we do now? Take a second, think about it, type it in. Click the like and subscribe button if you're here, if you're enjoying the show. As you bet bigger on the flop, your opponent folds out their trash. Yes, that's typically how it works. At this point, we have a very, very, very easy value bet on the river, especially if your opponent will not bluff raise often enough. On the river, in position, assuming you're trying to play reasonable strategies, the smallest size you should ever use is roughly 50% pot. If you bet smaller than that, you are reopening the action without that much potential gain. You'll find this happens in almost every Game Theory Optimal scenario, unless you're perhaps at a tournament with shallow stacks, which we are not here. So if we are going to bet the river, we need to be betting 50% pot or more. The question becomes, then, is more better? This is a spot where I certainly think more could be better because a lot of players will call any king and maybe even a 3 or a 2 or a pocket pair if they think you're capable of bluffing. If they think you're on the weaker, tighter side, then it's probably not going to be the case. Should you ever check back this river in pretty much any spot? Probably not. If we did bet the turn, we can go for value on this river. A lot of players, though, just check it back and think, all right, I'm going to win this $83 pot. This is good enough for me. And they're happy with that. But you should not be happy with that. Extract the value. And depending on your opponent's strategy, I think pot could be fine, or half pot, something like that. This time we go 2/3, which is maybe good or reasonable against a hypothetical opponent. We get called, we win the pot, we don't know what they had. But this kind of thing comes up very, very often. What are we getting value from? A 2 or a 3 is unlikely to call. We'll recognize on this run out, a lot of stuff missed. All the flush draws missed. Various straight draws if we had them missed. And therefore, if your opponent's folding out every pair to a river bet, they're going to be folding too often. Is that half pot size on every street or just the river? Only the river. This kind of thought process is what makes a lot of players miss out on a ton of value. And the nice thing about river value bets is that right here, while we are going to lose sometimes, we're extracting a lot of money. I don't know exactly how much, maybe $15 on average, $20 on average, maybe more, if your opponent is somewhat straightforward. But this is a spot where we are going to extract value from a lot of stuff. Also, recognize we are almost never beat here, right? Yeah, the opponent could have like Queen X of hearts, or Queen X of clubs maybe. Not Queen X of clubs, never mind, it's on the board. They could have Queen X of hearts. Probably not Ace Queen. A lot of people 3-bet that pre-flop, so they could have Queen Jack, Queen 10, Queen 9, Queen 8, Queen 7, Queen 6. Like 5 combinations of hands we lose to there. They're probably going to raise sets earlier, right? So we lose almost nothing. This is almost the nuts on the river against most players who, again, exhibit that tendency of not, of calling too often and not raising often enough. So yeah, easy value bet. If you find that you are not going for thinnish value against your small stakes opponents who are on that straightforward side, you are just losing so much value and you're going to have a difficult time moving up in stakes. Next, you need to bluff more often. A lot of small stakes players absolutely hate bluffing. They refuse to bluff. And if you never get caught bluffing, that means you're not bluffing often enough. Some of your bluffs should get called. It's okay. Imagine literally every bluff you make gets through. Well, bluff more. Keep bluffing more. Bluff and bluff and bluff and bluff and bluff until they call you. Many small stakes players simply do not put enough pressure on your opponents. Or on their opponents. So, on the turn, say you raise pre-flop, you continuation bet the flop, you're going to want to focus on semi-bluffs that can get there against your opponent's calling hands. Anytime you have some sort of draw, especially if it can't win at the showdown, like 9-high straight draw, 9-high flush draw, whatever, these are usually excellent hands to keep betting with. If you bet the flop and get called on the turn, if you have any chance to improve or any reasonable chance to improve, especially if you think your opponents fold a little bit too often on the turn, which a lot of players will, these are great hands to keep bluffing with. And then on the river, the larger you bet, the more often you get to bluff. This is why you see a lot of the best players in the world overbotting it very often on the river. In Game Theory Optimal World, again, like we discussed, the smallest bet size used on the river is something like half pot. Gabriel says, isn't betting 2/3 pot bad? You heard it's not GTO. Well, if you want to talk about GTO real quick, the actual GTO strategy will use every single bet size available down to some minimum. On the river in position, it's usually about half pot. Every bet size will be matched with some bluffs. Or every bet size for value will be matched with some bluffs. And the thing is, a lot of players who make solver programs only give the river bet size options, one option, like pot or half pot. In reality, there's a spectrum. So no, 2/3 pot certainly can be GTO. Although you will find very often a small bet is used and a big bet is used and a huge bet is used for simplicity. So yeah, bluff more often. Get in there and battle. When you bluff and get called, it assists you in getting value later, for sure. A lot of you seem super afraid to value bet this King 10. I don't know why. You have the nuts almost every time. By the way, if your value bets only get called when you're ahead, you're not value betting thinner enough. You have to realize, in this spot on the river, you only need to be good 50-ish% of the time to value bet, right? We're putting in 1 unit, the opponent's putting in 1 unit. If we're good 51% of the time, we make money, presuming we never get raised, which again, you will get raised sometimes, but when you get raised, you're probably crushed anyway. So in this spot, if you value bet, and when you get called, you're good more than half of the time, you profit. Not accounting for the fact that they may raise you, but again, like I said, most people aren't going to do that. So maybe you need to be good 55% of the time or 57% of the time on average, whatever it is, right? And I can guarantee you King 10 is good here, I don't even know, 80% of the time? Like a lot. A lot, even when you get called, because as played against most small stakes players, they simply don't have anything good. Okay? If you're really fighting this, you're going to have a hard time moving up because you are leaving a bunch of money on the table. Next, you need to stop slow playing big hands. Many players have fancy play syndrome when they make a really good hand. They think, okay, I want to check and try to get my opponents to bluff. But that is not a good strategy because remember, a lot of players don't bluff often enough. Also, when we are playing very deep stacked, you got to get money in the pot. And an easy way to get money in the pot is to bet. While the GTO strategy very often will slow play some very strong hands, that is not what you want to do against players who will not value raise thinly enough and will not bluff raise often enough, or bluff in general when you check it back. Instead, simply bet and get money in the pot. With your good hands, do not slow play. Also, don't get tricky and like bet minimum or something like that. No. Don't do any of that stuff. Play your hand reasonably in an aggressive manner to build the pot. Do not rely on your opponent's potential bluffs to get money in the pot unless you know them to be overly aggressive and maniacal. Oh my gosh, everybody wants to keep going back to this hand. Everyone, this is not a complicated hand. We have a very strong hand in this spot. We have a very strong hand in this spot. Simply bet and get money in the pot. What do we do if he raises us on the river? What do you think you do if he raises us on the river? Against a straightforward player who does not bluff raise the river very often, or at any street, What should we do if he check raises us on the river? What do you think? Say we bet 55 and he even raises minimum. Or more likely, he's probably going to rip it all in. Because he's saying he has a queen or nothing. If he doesn't bluff often enough, obviously fold. It's a trivially easy fold, as T. Krupka says. When you're value betting a medium strength hand and the opponent raises, and you don't expect him to raise very often at all, fold. Okay? Don't call. Don't think, oh, I need to see what he has. I need to keep him honest. No, you don't. No, you don't. So that is it. Those are the 5 preflop hacks for crushing small stakes cash games and the 5 postflop hacks for crushing small stakes cash games. Since we're talking about cash games, I'm actually having a Meetup game online. $50 no limit hold'em. They will be happening on March 30th on coinpoker. You can check that out at pokercoaching.com/meetup. I love playing with all of you. Yesterday on Poker Coaching, I actually reviewed some of the hands that I played against some of you. That was a lot of fun. So far, I've been beating a lot of you. I want you all to study these games and crush me. That'd be my dream. You haven't done it yet, but you can try again on March 30th. Also, we have a monthly leaderboard for cash games on coinpoker. We give away $1,000 each month to all of you. Check it out at pokercoaching.com/leaderboard to get into that. What time is that Meetup game? Let's see. I'll look it up in my calendar. Give me a second. It is on the 30th at 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific. If cash games aren't your vibe, or you want to play for only $1, we also have a weekly $1 buy-in tournament where we add $1,000 to the prize pool every single week. So far, we've given away something like $100,000 to Poker Coaching members over the last 6 or 8 months since we started this. Check it out at pokercoaching.com/weeklymtt. I think I'll be streaming it on March 30th. It's at the same time as the cash game. That'll be good. 2 for 1. What a great video. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Click the like button. Yes, indeed. You feel like a lot of players in low stakes make a lot of assumptions about their opponents even when they don't have they don't have information. A lot of poker players do this until they figure out, usually by getting taught the hard way, that you don't know what your opponents are doing. My favorites are when players just assume their opponents never bluff, and then their opponent runs a bluff, and they're like, oh my God, how, like somebody else calls, right? And like, I didn't think this guy ever bluffed. Yet he bluffs all the time. Would we still value bet? Oh my gosh, why is everyone keep talking about this hand? Would we still value bet the river if a heart comes? Yeah. Against someone who's not going to raise often enough. Probably want to go smaller then. Like half pot for sure. Because our hand would then be proportionally way worse. So yeah, there you have it. If you want to play for $1, March 30th, 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific, with $1,000 added to the prize pool. Check it out, pokercoaching.com/weeklymtt. Also, be sure if you're playing cash games that you are in our leaderboard where we give away $1,000 per month plus other prizes. And I would love to play with all of you in the Meetup game. Last time, I think we had something like 5 or 6 tables going. We had about the same number the time we did this before, which is a lot of fun. I'm in there battling hard, streaming it all. I'll be streaming it on YouTube, Twitch, wherever. So make sure you check that out. And that'll be fun. So yeah, come back for the stream then. Can you play a tournament without downloading an app? I don't even know what that means. I guess the answer is no. You have to download the poker program to play the poker program. 2-5 is a nit fest. Well, great. How do you play against players who are too tight? Raise smaller. Use lots of continuation bets for small amounts. And when you get raised, fold. You're going to win all the small pots that don't belong to you. And you're not going to pay them off whenever they have you beat. Simple as that. You played better at 1-2 than 2-5. You're more comfortable. Well, it sounds like you may not be bankrolled for either if this is a thought process you are having. Also, the players at 2-5 are going to be better than 1-2. As your opponents play better, it's naturally going to feel like you don't have as much of an edge, right? And typically, as you play for more money, the players are better. Not always, but typically. It took you a long time to stop projecting what you think about poker to your opponents. Yeah, a lot of players make this mistake in the small stakes games. They think that their opponents play like them. Like if you're tight, your opponent, you often think a lot of your opponents are tight. Or if you're loose, you think your opponents are loose. Or you think they're going to play some specific way. Recognize players play differently. It's not all about you. Also, some players get mad when their opponents don't play like they play. They think, oh, I would have folded that. That player, I'm not going to say cheated, but they did something wrong, and that messed me up. Get over all of that. This is why learning good, strong game theory optimal strategies is highly valuable. If you learn how to play good, strong game theory optimal strategies, whatever your opponent does, it's not the game theory optimal response, is going to lose them money. You need to be a poker coaching member. You do not. We have a Peak GTO app coming out. We actually are in the process of working with that right now. I have the demo version on my phone. 5-10 in some cases could be easier. Look, everyone. Look, everyone. Look, everyone. Look, everyone. Look, everyone. In 98% of cases, the smaller stakes game is going to be softer than the higher stakes game. There are a few exceptions, usually when a super whale is playing the bigger games because they have a lot of money. But a lot of players use this as an excuse, and they say, oh, if I just had more money, I would be winning in those games, or I would be able to play the bigger game and win. I can move up where they can respect my raises. None of that. All of these are asinine thought processes. If you cannot beat the small game, you're going to struggle at the bigger game. And in pretty much all situations, as you move up, the game is going to get tougher. That's because the losers are getting weeded out. In a typical 1-3 cash game at most local casinos, probably 8 or 9 out of the players at that table are not very good at poker. At 2-5, it's more like half the players. At 5-10, it's more like 1 or 2 of the players. Now, again, there are some exceptions. If you watch some of these live cash game streams that are curated around losing players who don't mind losing a ton of money, that will be different. That is not the case in most games, though. I can guarantee you, if you go sit your butt down right now at any casino, in either a 1-3 game or 5-10 game, the 5-10 game is going to be substantially tougher. One point about this, though, is the rake at 1-3 or 1-2 may be very big in some local casinos. I know in some local casinos, they take $15 rake out of a 1-3 pot if it gets more than like $60. If that's the case, well, you don't want to be playing that game because it's going to be tough to win. So you want to make sure that the rake in the game that you are playing is reasonable. And as your opponents are worse and worse, a reasonable rake can be bigger and bigger. But in most casinos, the rake is not egregious. You do have to be careful in like home games and stuff like that because they'll just rake whatever they can out of the pot. So be careful with that. Why do you think you're not making any progress? I don't know. Are you training yourself and drilling yourself? You say you study a little bit every day. Ask yourself, how are you studying? If you check out peakgto.com, we have a trainer there, and we will give you a score, a rating, based on how well you are playing. If number goes up, you're getting better. If number goes down, you're not. Also, I will say a lot of people think that studying poker is sitting at home on the couch having a beer after a long day of work and watching a live poker stream for 30 minutes. That is not study. That is goofing off. For some of you who are watching training videos and you're not really focusing, you're not really paying attention, you're not taking notes, you're not actively improving, it's not going to work. That is why at PokerCoaching.com, in the 2 main courses we have on the site, the Tournament Masterclass and the Cash Game Masterclass, the videos are short. They're about 10 minutes long. And they have quizzes after every single video to make sure you are in there and actively learning. This is a big flaw of a lot of training sites out there. They present you a video, and that's it. And sure, you may pick up a pointer or two, but if you're not actively learning, you are not going to actually improve at any sort of fast pace. Notice some of the people here in the chat. These are not bots. These are real people. They are saying that they have learned a ton from PokerCoaching.com because They're actively learning. They went through the Cash Gamer Tournament Masterclass, and they took the quizzes. They applied themselves. They learned. They're in there studying, and they're getting way better than their opponents. The great thing about not being all that good at poker is that you can get good at poker pretty quickly if you study the right things. While YouTube videos are fine and good, trying to take all of them and make some sort of robust strategy is going to take you forever, which is why we have two 40-hour-long courses to get you up to speed. Would you all believe? If people come to me for private coaching, first question I ask is, have you gone through either the tournament or the Cash Game Masterclass? If you have not done that, you got to do it first. It is a prerequisite. Everything you need to know to crush the games is right there in them, and it's over at PokerCoaching.com. You can be better than your opponents and still lose. Well, over the short term, not over the long term, unless the rake is huge. If you don't have notebooks filled with notes, you're probably not studying. Take a lot of notes. You've had big losses at 2-5 online. You're comfortable. Again, this idea of comfort, get this out of your head. Comfort is something you got to get rid of in your brain. If you only play when you are comfortable, you're going to end up skipping out on a whole lot of opportunities. It'll take double the time to recover the money at 1-2. What is your advice? Well, if you're losing at 2-5, if you are a losing 2-5 player, why would you think you can all of a sudden become a winning 2-5 player overnight? You're probably not skilled enough to win at 2-5. Or maybe you haven't actually played all that much. If you've not played 100,000 hands, your results are not going to be all that clear and indicative of your skill level. I know a lot of online sites now, they only let you play one table at a time, and they rake a lot. If you're playing on a site that only lets you play one table at a time and it rakes a lot, almost nobody's going to win. And it's going to take you forever to actually prove that to yourself. But if you are playing on a site like coinpoker that lets you play however many tables you want, that has a low rake, you'll get a pretty clear picture relatively quickly of if you are a winning player or not. And if you are playing, let's say, 60 hands per hour per table, let's get out a calculator here. Let's say you're playing 60 hands per hour, and let's say you're forward tabling. And let's say you play 6 hours per day. Let's say you do that 5 days per week. Notice, I did 6 times 10. There you go. That is 72,000 hands per month. Right? This is what a full-time player will do. In 1 month, you will have a very clear snapshot, or at least a reasonably clear snapshot, of how you are doing at poker. If instead you play 1 8-hour session once per week live, and you play 30 hands per hour, 30 hands, and let's say you play a full 8-hour session, a long time, although, of course, you can play longer, that's 240 hands per week. If you do this for a whole year, how many weeks are in here? 56, 52, my brain's broken. Whatever, it's roughly 12,000 hands. That's not that many hands. Also, if you're not very good at poker, your results will be bad. Recognize that volume cures variance. I have a big trophy case. This is only about a third of my trophies. I have a bunch in Vegas, I have a bunch in storage. We talk about tipping dealers and how much you should tip a dealer. Well, this is a question all of you have to answer for yourself. Let's imagine you make $15 per hour at 1-3 no limit hold'em, 5 big blinds per hour, but you tip the dealers $3. Now you're making $12 per hour. You just cut your income by 20%-ish. And you have to ask if that's cool with you or not. Now look, while I'm all for tipping people, I drastically overtip everyone. If you are not making it at poker, if you are not winning, your goal should be to win. You should become a winning poker player. I realize, look, I personally think it's absurd the casinos don't pay their dealers a livable wage. A lot of dealers get paid like waitresses, where they're getting paid $2 per hour or something. I personally think all businesses should pay their employees adequately. I think forcing the dealers to ask for handouts is absurd. I think that's crazy. That's like a horrible thing to put on your employees. It's like, gosh, maybe one of the worst things you can put on your employees is to have to beg the customers for money. So if you're playing small stakes games, you want to be tipping minimally. Simple as that if you care about winning money. What a lot of players do is they tip $5 every hand. If you're winning $15 per hand, or for $15 per hour, and you tip out $5 every hand, well, you're making no money. You literally take all of the profit and you're giving it to the dealers. It's unfortunate. The best low limit players you know do not tip big. Yes, simple as that. Do we have a money back guarantee for PokerCoaching.com? Yes, if you do not like PokerCoaching.com for any reason, let us know within a month of signing up and we'll give you all of your money back. If I do not help you win at poker, I do not want or deserve your money. Volume cures variance. It certainly does. As you play more, the results you are experiencing become a more and more accurate snapshot of your skill. If you play 10 hands of poker, you could easily lose, even if you're the best player in the world. If you play 10,000 hands, though, it's going to be a little bit harder to lose. If you play 1,000,000 hands, that's going to be a very clear snapshot of how you are actually doing at poker. Should you tip the online dealers as well? LOL. So as you play more and more, your overall results give you a better snapshot of how you're doing. Now, there are some caveats to this. First, the games may change, right? Maybe you start winning in the beginning, but then you, over the first 100,000 hands, but then you move up in stakes, or you move to a different site, or you move to a different venue, or you start playing differently, who knows? And that may impact your win rate, right? So you have to realize that the games evolve over time as well. It's not just I'm playing this game and it never changes. When was the last time I was angled? Honestly, I don't remember. I think I'm pretty angle proof. It's very important to make sure that you do not open yourself up to getting angled by shady people in the poker world. For example, never muck your hand unless you see their winning hand. Don't move until their action is very clearly taken. I mean, I'm like paranoid about this. Whenever I am playing poker and someone says all in, but does not put any money forward, as some people will try to do, I just sit there. Or, after a minute, I'll ask the dealer, are they all in? And the dealer will say yes. And then, ideally, you get that player to put some chips in the pot to indicate it to the camera that they are all in. And then you make your decision. Usually I don't wait a minute. If they say I'm all in, and it's not 100% clear to me, or I don't know them to be an upstanding person in the community, as a lot of your cash game players will not know, you need to get very clear clarification that they are all in. As a PSA, don't let other people borrow money. Yeah, in the ideal world, you don't need to borrow money, and don't let other people. If you don't need to get a loan, you should also never give a loan. I have about 5 people in the world who I could, in theory, ask money and they could, in theory, ask money from me. But these are all good world-class poker players, and if we need money, it's simply because we ran out of money at this individual location. Like if we go to the Bahamas and the trip goes especially poorly, but we have plenty of money in the bank, right? You can do that kind of thing. But yeah, in general, don't lend money. How healthy is live poker in Vegas? At small stakes, it's great. Does all this apply to tournaments? Yes, although you're going to be shallower stacked in tournaments. Are we doing a webinar at 4 o'clock? We are doing a webinar at 4 o'clock on PokerCoaching.com in 1 hour. Better wrap this one up and get to making that one, huh? We're going to be doing a webinar in 1 hour over at PokerCoaching.com. So make sure you get in there. We're going to be going through a few big cash game hands that were played by some of the best players in the world. Volume cures variance, but not if you're a losing player. What do you mean? Totally incorrect. If you're a losing player and you play 1,000,000 hands, your results will show that you are a losing player. The amount of lifetime losers that don't realize they are playing the amount. Your results over the long term are indicative of your skill level. You're not going to become a winning player if that's what you think volume cures variance means. You can be a very bad player and win. I mean, look at poker tournaments, right? I don't know the exact math on it, but there are some pretty bad poker players who have won poker tournaments. There have been some egregiously bad poker players who have won poker tournaments because they haven't played a lot of volume. There's been some egregiously bad poker players who have won Player of the Year. How about that one? Especially in Player of the Year races that are only for specific tournaments, like we're not going to go through and name them, because there's no volume there, right? That said, if you play a million hands and you're losing, that is your results. You are a losing player. If you play a million hands and you are winning, well, that's your results. You are a winning player. Maybe you took it to mean that if you put in a lot of volume, it means you're going to win. Nope. That's not what that means. It means that you get to see the actual snapshot of your results / edge. You just lost a 3-way all-in. Recognize that does not really matter. What happens over the course of 1 hand or 2 hands or 10 hands or 100 hands is irrelevant. You are going to run very poorly sometimes for a long period of time. You're going to run very well for long periods of time, some portion of the time. I'll give you a great example. Last year, I won the Poker Go Cup. I won 2 tournaments out of 8 and cashed in 2 others. So I cashed in half the tournaments I played, and I won 2 of them over the course of 8 tournaments. That is running super hot. Sure, I'm playing well, but I was also running very hot. And that's okay. It's going to happen. I've also had long stretches with no cashes. I think I'm currently like 0 for 15 over my last 15 tournaments. Am I all of a sudden playing poorly over the last 15 tournaments? No. And a lot of them I've gotten down to like the top 20% of the field, lost a flip, and was out. You got to recognize min cashes don't pay the bills in tournaments. So realize that variance exists. And that's okay. Winston S. asked me anything. I don't know. Does anyone know if Jonathan Little would do poker coaching? What do you mean, if I would do poker coaching? You want to win a bracelet event? Well, I would recommend if you want to win a bracelet event and give yourself the absolute best shot, you should be playing only the mixed game events and only the very high buy-in ones, because those have fewer poker players. Winning a 1,500 player, $1,000 buy-in tournament, though, is very, very difficult. How do you keep the morale up when you have a losing streak? Recognize losing streaks don't matter. I mean, I guess, look, to be fair, I'm a little bit lucky in that, I mean, look, there's trophies everywhere, right? I've done very well in poker. So I realize I probably have an edge in most games I play, as long as the games are not overly tough. And that's all I need to know. If you see your opponents making mistakes that you do not make, and you're studying your hands and making sure you're not making any sort of egregious mistakes, then it doesn't really matter. To win at poker, you have to do 3 things. You have to find a game you can beat, play it a lot, and keep a proper bankroll. A lot of people forget number 3. They don't keep a proper bankroll. They have 10 buy-ins and think, all right, I'm going to go run it. That's a bad strategy. You're probably going to lose. You're probably going to go broke, because I just told you I'm 0 for 15 in tournaments, right? I mean, that happens. You want your way into a $600 tournament. You have 4 days. I would recommend start studying 5 years ago, but go in there and do your best and have fun. Check out PokerCoaching.com. Go through the tournament masterclass. Have we watched any of the Coin Poker Cash Game World Championship? Yes, and in fact, we're going to be going through 3 really cool hands from the Cash Game World Championship on PokerCoaching.com in about 50 minutes. You're excited for the Meetup Cash Games? Good. Oh, that's Justin Sleva. Hello. Justin Sleva gets in there and battles. And the Meetup games, here's Justin, one of the best poker players in the world. He gets in there and battles harder than most. What's the rake on coin poker? I'm not entirely sure, but it is not all that high. All right, that's going to be it for today. Good luck in your games. Have fun. Make sure you get in the weekly $1 tournament on coin poker. We add $1,000 to that every week for all of you. Check it out, pokercoaching.com/weeklymtt. If you're a cash game reg, make sure you get in our monthly leaderboard. And if you want to play 50-cent dollar against me on the 30th of this month, check out pokercoaching.com/meetup. Good luck in your games. Have fun. Make the most of your opportunities. Click the like and subscribe button before you leave. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. I'll talk to you next time.